Shining bright lotus. Thank you all for being here this morning. It's a lovely morning. It's so nice to see faces. Today's kind of an interesting talk, and let's turn into a discussion because I'm going to introduce Cosmopolitan Zen. And it's something that I've been, thinking about and trying to give a language to what we're doing here. Mingpo and I talk about this quite a bit, and I talk about it with other folks. But let's sort of start by what is cosmopolitan? Why even bother use the word? Well, the root, politan, is citizen. Okay, and citizen of the cosmos is what the technical definition of cosmopolitan is. Okay, of course, there's a few modern nuances that have come about. But that's the technical term. And so let's put it, Zen, what is Zen? Well, Zen, we know from some of our literature, arrives from dhyana. Okay, dhyana really being the description of pure awareness, essentially in some way or another, or concentration leads to dhyana. And dhyana then gets translated as chan and Zen. But, it wouldn't be fair just to reduce Zen into dhyana, because Zen is definitely a Japanese word, and it definitely more so describes the dhyana state that Zen frames in some way or another. Okay, so I like the word Zen. Emio and I talk about this all the time. What makes Zen Zen? And so we are a lineage that came through as a Japanese lineage, and of course our founding leader, Junpo Roshi, kind of left and founded the Hollow Bones Order because he felt like the Zen that he was evolving, which we have all evolved, was not as Japanese as the tradition would have liked it. So he founded Hollow Bones Zen, or he created what you would say is Mondo Zen as the form. So I'm not turning Cosmopolitan Zen into a trademark term. I think it's actually more of an adjective. And so I actually found a really wonderful definition of the adjective of cosmopolitan, which is found in most places in and of varied ecological conditions. Most places of the world and under a variable or varied ecological conditions. So let's say that. Zen that can be in most places and in various conditions. Okay. Now I actually start to like that because oftentimes the Zen that we've inherited from the Japanese tradition likes to be in certain places. Likes to be in monasteries. It likes to be in, groups. It likes to have very formal structures. So to me, a cosmopolitan Zen is a Zen that can go to wherever it needs to go to. It can be wherever it needs to. It can look like whatever it needs to look like. And interestingly, Buddhism historically has this quality where wherever it goes, it turns into something that looks like where it is. So the Zen that we're doing in America looks much different than the Zen that we're doing in Japan. And that's okay. It also looks a little different in Canada and in Europe, because it makes sense that we take these teachings and we make them meaningful for ourselves. So this is important to me because I'm interested in this idea of diversity and inclusion. And I want to, I've been doing a little bit of work on this. Part of that idea is, we can talk about diversity in terms of race, and we can talk about diversity in terms of class. We can talk about diversity in terms of ideas. We can talk about diversity in terms of Zen. Can we have diverse Zens rather than one Zen? Let's pick a few Zens that we kind of know about. Most of us know about Soto and Rinzai, but at some point there were 5 schools way back then. And actually there's even more than 2 schools right now, because Sanbo is actually a very, very successful Zen. We don't talk about it much in the United States, but it's the head of the Sanbo is a businessman in Japan. But in America, there's various Sangos that are doing Sanbo. Also, you would not say that Chan is Zen at this stage. So Chan is the Chinese version of Zen, and it's practiced in a variety of places. So if you were to look around America, you'd probably find a good 15 different types of Zen, so to speak. So a Cosmopolitan Zen says we can include all these. We don't have to pick one and say we're this one. We can say this Zen includes different Zen perspectives. Okay, so then basically it becomes a Zen that's diverse and inclusive, and it can be found in a variety of places. I like that because in this day and age, particularly, we have the phenomenon that we can stay in one place and be in a variety of different places. Let me see. We got the Bronx, Portugal, Santa Fe, Wisconsin, Boulder, Scotland, Vermont, White Plains, South Dakota, California, and Canada, Manitoba. I could get to exactly, I know where you all live, but that's pretty much, we're all in one place and in different places all at the same time right now. So I hope our Zen can include that, because if it can't, then it doesn't seem very Zen to start talking in parables, right? Because it is what's right here. Right, so we can be in diverse ecological niches. We can be online. We can be in person. We can be hybrid. We can be in monasteries. We can be in the marketplace. Marketplace is a term that we use a lot for householders. So that split a long time ago was very common. There's meditation and spiritual practices where you remove yourself, or there's householder practices. And it's interesting because when you start to look at non-dual types of perceptions, then you start to notice that there's lots of different non-duals and non-dual schools and non-dual perspectives, and they're all a little bit affected by context. Right, so it's like, well, if you remove yourself, I remember actually having this recollection when I learned about macrobiotics. Macrobiotics seemed like a great diet if you didn't live in a busy city and didn't live in a place where you couldn't possibly find food like that. Macrobiotics was actually more about eating local food. But by the time it rolled into America, it turned into a group of foods that you buy in a health food store that looked very Japanese. So that might be what happens to Zen, right? It's a practice that has all these trappings, but I think a Cosmopolitan Zen is one that really allows it to include these different forms, not only of Zen, because Zen is actually Mahayana. So why couldn't our Cosmopolitan Zen include Theravada? Okay, we did that. So Emio and I this year taught the 4 foundations of mindfulness, the Pali Canyon. That's actually, it's interesting. The Japanese Zen that we inherit kind of starts at Bodhidharma. We sort of talk about it going all the way back, but in terms of the literature and the sutra study, it's founding. I like to say its creation myth in Chan Zen is Bodhidharma meeting with the emperor and saying no merit, and who am I don't know, not knowing, and then going and sitting for 9 months, 9 years, and looking at a wall, which is definitely not a householder model. I don't think his family would have grooved on 9 years of wall sitting, right, if he had kids. So that works really well if that's your thing. But you know what? Our Sangha is rather diverse in the sense that we all live in regular lives and we have families and kids and we're different ages, and some have grandchildren, some have children, some don't. Okay? So we include samatha practice, shamatha. I always have a sloppy with that particular word, which in a lot of ways is a Theravada practice. Mindfulness is often a Theravada practice. Mahayana is bigger than Zen. right? The Bodhisattvas, in the spring practice period, we're going to look at a big swath of Bodhisattvas, and the Mahayana actually shows up in other forms besides Zen, so we include that in the Cosmopolitan Zen. Vajrayana, right, pointing out instructions. Mahamudra, why not? So why is there a reason why our Cosmopolitan Zen will say we can't use language like metacognitive attention, metacognitive awareness, looking for emptiness in order for us to have these experiences so that we can better be able to sit together on the cushion? So a Cosmopolitan Zen has a very, very diverse inclusion of many forms of Buddhist perspectives and Zen perspectives. Which ones do we choose? We choose the ones that most resonate with who we are and that serve us to be able to practice, which is, of course, why we're here. We're here to, you could say we're here to serve the dharma, but you could also say that we're here to be of service to the challenges that we face in our daily life in this world. There are other tools that we might incorporate, though, that to me are important to a Cosmopolitan Zen, because we're in a moment in time. Now, of course, time, as we noticed, comes and goes, and in pure awareness, it doesn't come and go, so there is no time. So it doesn't really matter. You don't really need to do anything about time. But if we're living householder lives, we happen to be in this time, 2024, and we've learned a lot by the time 2024 comes out, particularly around psychology. So it would seem, and this is something, one of the reasons why Junpo founded Mondo Zen was because there's needed to upgrade the psychology or the psychological understanding. And not that actually Nagarjuna's psychology is fabulous, right? 2nd and 3rd century, right? But particularly emotional psychology. So the two pieces that show up for me when I think about the psychological pieces that are important to a Cosmopolitan Zen are developmental perspectives that says that our life cycle has developmental psychological perspectives that allows us to see more objects and to understand the universe in subtler and subtler ways. Okay, so we start off seeing concrete objects when we're children, and we then move to subtle objects, right? So we can say that color of our skin is a concrete object, so it's important that our diversity includes that, but we can start moving to subtler objects around diversity that says you can't really see one's education or one's social class necessarily, but those actually are affecting who we are and how we sort, right? Our intellect, our emotional maturity. Those are subtle objects. So we want our Cosmopolitan to include those perspectives. So that's saying, well, time matters because we're in the 21st century. We've also learned a lot about education. And we have this interesting way of assuming that good teaching is good teaching at all times. At one point in time, I think you guys all know, many of you know that I was a music teacher, and I wanted to study, particularly interested in ethnicity, ethnic tribes and different cultures in music. And I quickly got over that. Then I found that the most common way to become an Indian music master was to have your father to basically tie you up to the tree and say, you're not going to eat until you master your scales. Right? It's a very common way of teaching in many cultures are very punitive. You learn how to be a really good something because if you don't, something bad's going to happen. Okay, and so it turns out that we've learned a lot about it. Right? We've learned a lot about it over time, particularly in the 20th century. The two things I like to talk about in terms of pedagogy, that's the language for that, is cycles of learning. Set, seek, apply, and reflect. Like, how's it going? What am I learning? Which is something that is actually done in very refined ways in traditional Zen. So let's talk about that. In a traditional Zen setting, in a Chan setting, the only time that you reflect on your learning experience is when you're in a Dokusan setting with the teacher. Okay, the rest of the time you're actually asked not to do that. The rest of the time you're asked not to do that because that's thinking. I mean, mindfulness is noticing it. But noticing it is different than reflecting upon it. Reflecting on it is like, how'd it go? Right? So that's why you see that powerful tool in Chuladasa's metacognitive awareness where you reflect on, you notice what's happening. Right? As well as taking it into starting to see us have different types of conversations in sanghas where we start to actually ask people to reflect upon our experience and have larger conversations. Enma uses that style quite a bit in her teaching because we learn from each other when we reflect on our experience. Because, oh, you had that happen to you too? And actually you see that in the way Junpo taught Mondo on Mondo retreats, right? Where that experience was allowed us to share. That's a very actual 20th century technology. The other learning technology that's really important to me and to Cosmopolitan Zen is this one that I'm recently gotten into. I got it from Terry Fallon Stages, which is you go from receptive, well, what is it I'm learning, to active, I'm using the tools, to reciprocal, oh, I got to teach it to you, which anyone who's read Mondo Manual know that Junpo used to say, you don't really know it till you have to teach it to someone else. That's a learning cycle. Take it in, work with it, now have somebody else. It's not that I can fish, it's can I show someone else how to fish, that I start to understand it differently, and then I get to what's called interpenetrative. I can start to see the universal patterns as I do that over and over again. I talked to Mingpo and I were talking about this recently because when you start to do Mondo with 20, 30, 40, 50, 70, 100 people, it looks different. They used to say that in the chiropractic profession. When you get into your 10,000th your adjustment, the whole thing starts to feel and look different. Okay, that's not just chiropractic. Lots of professions like to use that particular number. Be a lot of Mondos. I don't know if it's going to get to the 10,000 anytime soon. So, Cosmopolitan Zen includes these learning cycles. Okay? I will say, so I said psychological, developmental, and then learning. And I want to make sure I go back in the psychological to emotional because I do have notes. And I want to say that we're learning a lot about emotional development. I want to look at my time. And Carla McLaren, one of my heroes, right, has the 4 keys to an emotional genius. Right, I decided I wanted to share the 4 keys to emotional genius. Right, number 1 is there are no negative emotions and there are no positive emotions. Should I say that again? There are no negative emotions, there are no positive emotions. They're just emotions. Okay, it's a really interesting one, right? Number 2, learn how to channel your emotions. Number 3, understand nuance. And number 4 is identify multiple emotions. Right? This idea that often it's not just one happening. There's a bunch going on here, which goes with nuance. Okay? I added a 5th one to that. Right, which is allow emotions to be access to your liberation. That's the Junpo emotional genius, right? That's the one step. You can do those 4, right? And then there's opportunity. There's an opportunity for liberation in your emotions. So psychologically, I kind of did this out of order. I was talking about developmental. I'd hoped to do emotions and then do learning cycles, but you get the idea, right, of these pieces of Cosmopolitan Zen. So we have diversity of Buddhism, we have diversity of psychological perspectives, we have learning cycles that allow us to learn and grow and accept the differences and include one another's perspectives as we actually bear witness to each other and to what is arising in the householder world. And then we end up landing back on the original Buddhist teachings. And I'm a big fan of Stephen Batchelor's version of the original Buddhist teachings, which is the Fourfold Task. You might be familiar with the Fourfold Task as the Four Noble Truths. But if we are noticing things like nuance, then we might actually update that to the Fourfold Task. Okay, the Fourfold Task is comprehend suffering, or dukkha. I'll say that again. Comprehend suffering. Let go of the arising of suffering. That's the second task. The third task, actually I should say the second one is let go of the arising of suffering or reactivity. So the word for suffering, well, dukkha is suffering, but the second truth has this word tana in it, right? And he interprets tana as reactivity, the reactivity to the suffering. Junpo uses that term quite a bit, right? Reacting skillfully. So comprehend the suffering. So what's really here? What's the suffering like? Let go of the arising of the reactivity. Rather than react, respond. Behold the ceasing of reactivity, which in Mondo would be drop, stop and drop. Behold the ceasing. In order to let it go, you have to stop and drop. Right? Cultivate the path. Fourfold task. Comprehend suffering. Let go of the arising of suffering or reactivity. Behold the ceasing of the reactivity. Meditate, practice, be able to drop, cultivate the path. Cosmopolitan Zen. Cultivating the path of awakening together. So coming to the conclusion of all this, I hope you're following, and I hope I'm making some sense. I want to share a koan. Some of you are familiar with this one. I'm using, speaking of Cosmopolitan, I'm using David Hinton's version of the Blue Cliff Record, which I like. This is a Yunmen, who's also, Hinton puts Yunmen as Cloud Gate Mountain, or Yunmen. He says, instructing the assembled Sangha, Yunmen says, medicine and disease cure each other. The whole vast expanse of this world, it's all medicine. And what are you yourself? Medicine and disease cure each other. The whole vast expanse of this world, it's all medicine. What are you yourself? The whole vast expanse of this world is medicine. What are you yourself? So I see Cosmopolitan Zen as taking multiple perspectives consciously as a means to include and make room for local, regional, cultural, and ecological conditions. Shining bright lotus.